This is Antic, the Atari T.H.E.S.I.S podcast.
Oh my gosh, I was like kicking out a program every other month. That was a lot of coding.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Linda Watson Call is better known to Atari users as Linda Schreiber, which was her name at the time. Linda was the founder of T.H.E.S.I Software, an educational software publisher for the Atari 8-Bit and Apple II computers. The company was best known for her game, Big Math Attack. She wrote several books about the Atari 8-bit computers, Atari Programming with 55 Programs, Advanced Programming Techniques for Your Atari, and Atari Fun Games discover new heights in game-playing excitement on Any Atari, as well as books about the TI-99-4A and Atari ST computers. She also wrote the education column in very early editions of Antic magazine. This interview took place on November 25th, 2017.
My husband at the time was an electronics nut. I mean, he built everything from our TVs to our stereo sets and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think it was Popular Electronics, I could be wrong, came out with the ELF computer that you could build for under $100, he decided to do that. And he did. I was not impressed because I thought it was a lot of money back in those days spent on something that was toggle switches and an LED and virtually did nothing. But that led to him buying the Altair, which was a precursor for all of the computers that are out there today,
Sure.
which he built, and that piqued my imagination, my creativity, because now I could see the computer doing something more than turning a light on. And so I got interested in programming and what the computer could actually do. I had young children at the time, and so education was at the top of my list of what this computer could possibly do, and started playing with it. And there were no programming classes available, so I had to do a lot of reading and research on the few manuals that we got. No internet, so I can't Google anything. And got really intrigued and involved with it. After writing a couple articles on how I was using the computer with my kids, I wrote for Light Calculators and Computer magazine. I wanted to move to the TRS-80 because that was just out on the market, and I could see that it had a lot more potential than the Altair that we had.
Mm-hmm.
It was expensive, and we decided that we couldn't afford it at that time, so I did the next best thing I could. I found a small computer store that had TRS-80s, and I worked for them, learning how to manipulate that machine and program it. And my manager said to me one day, hey, there's a new computer coming out called the Atari. It's going to be color. It should have higher resolution than the TRS-80 does. Do you think we should carry it? And I looked at him and said, whether you carry it or not, I want one. Because we did have what they were calling a dazzler for our Altair, and I could see the difference between programming things in color and black and white, and what a difference it made even for the kids to see it and want to do things that were in color. So he ordered me one, and it came in. It was the Atari 400, and brought it home and started playing with it, and I just fell in love with it because it had so much potential to it. On the flip side, it was, 4K of RAM, and I felt like I was programming in a cardboard box,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned tight code, I'll tell you that, because you had no room for error. You had no room to say, well, I'll just put a couple jumps here or go twos, and you had to have tight code to get it to work in the Atari 400. So needless to say, I upgraded to an Atari 800, and the rest is history. I had published an article for Byte magazine, and Tab Book saw it and wrote to me and asked me if I would be willing to write a book on programming, since programming at that time was starting to become hot.
Mm-hmm.
And I said yes, and they said, do you have an Atari? And I said yes, and went on to write some books on how to program the Atari, the ins and outs of it, how to use machine language to get it to do some of the things that weren't quite able to be done in BASIC, and wrote some programs that sold quite a bit, I would say, for their time.
Great. Well, let's dig into some of those projects. I don't know what order anything came in, so I mean, maybe you can tell me. You wrote some books. You wrote for Antic magazine. There was T.H.E.S.I software. Kind of what came first?
First came the articles that were not Atari.
Mm-hmm.
Then when we got the Atari, I saw the potential because of the store that I used to work in. By that time, I quit that store and said, I can do this on my own, and decided to start writing educational programs for kids and eventually for schools, because schools started to add computers to their classrooms
mm-hmm.
at that time. So most of my programs that I wrote were for K through 4, K through 5. Because of the capability of the sprites in Atari, I was able to get some animation that you couldn't get on the other computers that were available at that time. So I wrote things like Word Scramble, where I had a robot that shot letters out of his gun, and then the kids had to unscramble whatever they saw on the screen. I also learned very early to watch what words you put up there, because some words like this can be scrambled into a word that you really don't want the kids saying.
Nice.
So that was pretty much the first programs that I did were game-type programs that were educational. I would look at card games like Go Fish and created a program called Fishing for Homonyms. Then about probably 2 years into writing these games, the cartridges were big mm-hmm. for Atari, and our local store would lend me a cartridge to review. And my son was reviewing, I think it was called Missile Command. These missiles were flying over the city. They were dropping bombs. You had to save the city. And being a boy, he loved it. But I overheard him say, well, that wasn't bad. I only lost 2 cities. Mm-hmm. And that kind of struck a nerve with me, that this is a little bit more violent than I want my kid to be playing, especially when his concept now was, I only lost 2 cities. And so I thought, how can I combine the thrill of missiles and invaders and things like that with education, and devised the Big Math Attack, which was a hit. It was one of our best-selling programs. Mm-hmm. And essentially what it did was it dropped an equation over the city, and you had to answer the equation before the equation landed, give it the answer, but it never destroyed the city. So I'm sure there were a lot of kids out there that, didn't particularly care for that aspect of it, but I'm sure there were a lot of parents who did. And then at the end, it always prompted them as to what their score was and gave them some encouragement that they could do better. Mm. And that one, I like to say, was the precursor to the edutainment programs that we see today. Because within 6 months, there were more attack programs like Type Attack and Spell Attack and things like that. So I figure, you had a hit on your hands and everybody else was trying to copy what you did.
Right. It's That's how you know you've done something well, if everyone else does it too. It seemed like I read some quotes and things from you from back then that like nonviolence was really what you were going for in the programs you made. You seemed like you really didn't like things like Missile Command, where people were dying in terrible ways.
Right. I'm not against hunting or things like that, but the fact that, to me, some of these programs were encouraging, and I don't want to use the word really encouraging, but the violent aspect of it was, there was no recourse for it. You know, you lost 2 cities. What are you going to do for retribution or something like that? So that's the part that I didn't like about it, and I still don't. I still don't like the programs that are more violent than the ones that aren't.
So you made your company called T.H.E.S.I.S Software, which was T.H.E.S.I.S. Oh, did T.H.E.S.I.S stand for something?
Yes. Timely Home Educational Software and Informational Systems.
That's a mouthful.
It is. We had hoped, besides doing educational software, that I could branch out into more informational database type programs. What surprised me within the first couple of months of having my software out there on the market, I was getting inquiries from farmers wanting to know if I could write programs to help them with genetics with their animals or other aspects of farming that I was clueless on. And so it was like, it would make sense that they would want a system that could help them analyze what they were doing and do it better. But sorry, I'm not the person to do that. I'm good with information, but not if I'm not familiar with exactly what you're doing.
Sure.
But that was our goal, to expand to other informational database manipulation, things like that.
Cool. But it seems like you mostly stayed in the educational software space. Which was
true.
Which was a fine place to be. Looking at a list of the T.H.E.S.I.S software for the Atari, you did also stuff for Apple II, I believe, right, and other platforms?
Right. Once we saw the potential with the Atari, then we got an Apple II, and we started converting most of the programs over for the Apple as well.
Okay. So was your big seller Big Math Attack?
Our big seller was the Big Math Attack. I can't tell you how many because over the years I've lost the record.
Sure.
But it was like every other order that came in was for the Big Math Attack.
Were you selling to schools or to parents? Who was buying this?
We sold to parents. We did get orders from schools, and we also had a few stores throughout the country that purchased our products. And so we sold through them as well.
Cool. I'd like to quickly run down the list of T.H.E.S.I.S software, just the list I have, and this is not a quiz in any way, but if you have a memory or something to say about it, just pipe up, or otherwise we'll keep moving, if that's okay.
Okay.
Maybe you can, something to say about some of them. Many of these I don't know what they are. There are no screenshots. They kind of haven't been archived, and some of these educational software programs are harder to find, so I haven't been able to try them. Answer Tutor, Bulls, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, Answer Tutor is not mine.
Okay.
So I don't know, and I saw that list. I don't know who did it under our name, but as far as I know, we were starting to branch out and have writers for us and send us programs.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that is one that we purchased from another programmer and put under our list or not, but that was that one that I wrote.
Okay. It was programmer was somebody named Skaggs, if that helps.
Okay. Yeah, no memory.
Okay. I don't know one of these words. Bulls and clots?
Bulls and Cleats, yes. That, again, was not one of ours.
Okay.
But it was I want to say it was more like a tic-tac-toe game. I could be wrong. It's been a while. But it was a game of sorts.
Casino 1, computation.
Casino 1 was, I'm going to say, a poker game and some other games that you would play in a casino.
Mm-hmm.
Computation was a game where, based on the TV show Concentration, where you had to pick squares and flip them over and then try to make matches.
Sure. Cribbage, classic card game.
Cribbage was the board game Cribbage, played with the computer.
Fishing for homonyms.
Okay, that was teaching kids about homonyms using the card game Fish.
Guessword.
Guessword was, I'm going to guess Guessword was like a hangman program.
Sure. Hidden words. Okay.
Hidden words. Yeah, hidden words, you had a bunch of letters on the screen, and you have to find the words that were in those letters.
Like a word find.
Like a word find, yes.
I see.
Except I don't think I told them what words were there.
Oh, that's mean. It's About Time, which I assume is a clock reading program.
Yes, and that was done by somebody else for us.
Okay. Math Facts levels 1, 2, and 3.
That would be addition and or subtraction programs for grade 1, possibly 2 and 3, but advanced. Grade Math Facts level 1 was strictly single column addition, and then Math Facts level 2 and 3 went up further with carrying and things like that.
Okay.
Borrowing, subtraction.
Mm-hmm. This next one I know you didn't do, but you published, called Number Blunder, which is a great name.
And I cannot remember what that one was about at all.
Okay. Preschool Fun.
Preschool Fun was with colors and shapes.
Yeah.
The type of things to get the kid ready for school.
Spatial Relations.
Spatial relations had to do with large and small, before, behind, up and down, anything that is considered spatial when you're working with kids in the classroom.
Sure. So did the stuff like this, did you come up with these ideas on your own, or were they requested by teachers, or where do these concepts come from?
Most of the concepts came from my kids' workbooks. Because I had kids in school, and I could see where they were having problems, or they would have something that I thought, hey, that's really neat. I could turn that into a computer program. Mm-hmm. So basically that's where I got most of my ideas from. I had never had a school or a teacher ask me if I could write a program for a particular subject or topic.
Something called Spellbound.
Spellbound was a spelling program, and if I'm not mistaken, it worked with a speech synthesizer that had come out on the market, where you heard the word and then had to spell it.
Nice. Awesome. And then, let's see, Tonal Encounter. Some sort of...
Oh, that was like the Simon game.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And you can press the different buttons and make songs and based on the colors and the keys that you pressed.
Okay. Nice. Weights and measures. Weights and
measures, have to do with inches and feet,
sure,
and converting pounds and ounces. The typical types of worksheets that the kids would bring home.
Sure. And one called Word Scramble, and the final one is called Word Mate.
Word Scramble is the one that I said about the robot that shot the letters out, and you had to scramble it to make the correct word. Word Mate was teaching compound words. So you would have a bunch of words on the screen, and you would have to pair them off to make a word.
Nice. So, you said what your big seller was. I'm just curious, like, some of these, it seems like there wasn't, was there a big market for, were some of these the small sellers? I mean, were they selling, at all, or were they?
Yeah, everything sold, but it was when you figure out how many computers there were really out and how many computers were really in the home, and then the whole demographic thing. Some of them we would sell maybe 2 or 3 a month, and like the Big Math Attack, we were selling 20, 25 of those a month, maybe even more if a store ordered them in volume. So everything on there sold. We kept track of our sales so that if we saw something didn't sell for a couple of months, it's like, well, we're not going to advertise it. It'll be in our catalog, but we're not going to spend the advertising money on that particular software piece because we're not getting a call for it.
So between all those little programs and then all the programs that you wrote for your books, like Atari Fun Games is just, filled with little type-in programs. You must have written hundreds of programs.
At one time it surprised me because you have to realize we were only doing this for maybe 4 years, because once the market took a spin, we closed our doors. And somebody asked me one time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like kicking out a program every other month. That was a lot of coding. But yes, and the books and everything, I spent a lot of time in front of the computer.
I bet. So let's talk about the books. I think most everything you wrote was published by Tab. Do you remember how you got hooked up with them and how those projects started?
Yes, I had written a very small program that Byte Magazine published, and it was right at the beginning of what I want to call the computer boom, where people were starting to buy computers and then looking for books to program them. And I got a letter from Tab Books saying that they saw my program in Byte Magazine and would I be interested in writing a book. And they gave me a whole list of topics and types of computers that they were looking for books for. And so I called them because writing a book was on my bucket list. I just didn't know it was going to be a computer book. And so I called them back and said, yes, I would. One of the computers they were looking for was the Atari, which I happened to have. And so that's how we hooked up together. I wrote the first book for them. And the thing, too, that amazes me is that I had to write the programs, but then I had to type it. We didn't have a word processor. And so everything had to be typed out and sent to them. I met my deadline, and a couple of months later, they asked me if I would write a second book. And so I did. I wrote the advanced programming techniques for the Atari, which I go more in depth into some of the tricks that you could do with the Atari. I was very surprised because that book came out, I want to say, fallish. And when I opened up the newspaper, Walden Books, which was a big bookstore chain at the time, had 2 of my books bundled together as the best Christmas present for people who had computers.
Wow.
So we sold a lot of books.
Yeah.
I put it in our catalog. I autographed a lot of books, and I was tickled because I never thought that one of my books would sell that well.
That's great. Did you make some decent royalties off those?
The royalties were good enough. You know, based on what they were paying at the time and what the book sold for, the royalties were very good. We were able to live off of the company for about 2 years, so between the books and the software we sold, we did okay. And I enjoyed it. I wrote another book, The Atari Fun Games.
Discover new heights in game-playing excitement on Any Atari.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. And then Tab came back to me and asked me to write another book on the Atari when, I don't even remember the number of it, but they wanted me to partner with another author and do another Atari book. Right. And that was the last book that I wrote for Atari.
Okay, yeah, the 1001 Things to Do with Your Atari ST, I think.
That would be it. Mm-hmm. That would be it.
With Mark Sawish, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think you also co-authored The Last Word on the Texas Instruments 99.4A with, I'm guessing, your husband at the time?
Yeah, they asked me to do the book on the TI 99/4A, and I did that with my husband because the Atari was like my machine, and he got the other machine. And so when they asked me to do that, and it was going to be called the same thing as my first book, but when TI pulled the plug on the Atari, they called me and they said, we still want you to write the book, but we're changing the name on it. Mm-hmm. And that changed the name too. So I was rather pleased that they didn't kill the book too.
Yeah, that's what most publishers, I think, would do. But calling it The Last Word is actually kind of clever.
I didn't object.
Right. Okay. Let's see. You wrote for some of the very early editions of Antic magazine, the education column.
Right. Yes, I did. I think I wrote 2 or 3 articles for them. It's been a while. So I have to refresh my memory as far as what I wrote. But
sure.
Education was really, like I say, education was really my stronghold. I wanted to see the computer being used more than for games, and so that's where I put my focus.
What else? What haven't we talked about that time that we should have?
Well, I could say that my living room turned into an office.
Yeah.
Because we did work out of the house. I didn't see any reason to rent an office building for, 2 computers and shipping. So I was working out of the house, but with computers, you need a lot of space. So our living room turned into our office space, and we had a basement, so that became our family room, living room area. And I will say the kids adapted well, except that my youngest was like 4 or 5 at the time. And we went to a local store, and she was looking around, and she said, where do these people sleep? And I said, in their homes? And so because of how we worked from the home, she thought everybody who worked in that store lived in that store.
Nice.
And so I'm sure some of those people felt that way, but I just thought that was interesting, and I often wondered how our living arrangements would play out for our kids when they realized that everybody doesn't work from home, and most people have a job elsewhere.
Were your kids excited by the computers?
They were. They actually took part in the business. My one daughter was old enough so that she could manage the inventory. We got a tape-to-tape duplicating machine because everything was on cassette tapes. And her job was to duplicate tapes. So she actually liked that because she was able to earn a quarter a tape. And it was all done in real time. So she could study and watch tapes and make sure that everything went through. My son was particularly intrigued with the computer. He loved it for as long as way back even when we had the Altair, that he enjoyed doing things on the computer. So I turned him into our quality control person. Poor kid, he had to play games on the computer all day.
Oh, poor kid.
He is now with computers. He has been a career person with computers. And sometimes I think he thinks I cursed him because he can find a bug faster than anybody in any software. But I told him that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And my youngest one wasn't really old enough to do much other than count the inventory and make sure we had everything. But so they were part of the business. But the other part of it was they got very familiar with computers. And by the time computers were in schools for them, it was not a novelty for them. We used to joke that most people at that time had a TV in every room. We had a computer in every room. And so they were for them it was a way of life that everything was on the computer. And even to this day, they are, the girls not so much involved with the computers, but they are comfortable with them. And like I said, my son has a career with computers. So I would say it was good for them to be exposed that early because they did get a lot of benefits of it.
Great. So when did you shut down the company and decide to move on to other things? And did any particular thing bring that on, or what brought the end?
There was a turn in the industry. CBS was getting involved with producing software. They saw the benefits of the software. And if I can brag, I had the vice president of CBS in my living room because they were looking at us as a possible partner to do educational software.
Cool.
It turned out that I thought it was cool. It turned out they chose Sesame Street to work with, which made a lot more sense to me because they had more resources there than I could ever provide for them. Mm-hmm. But once they got into the business and other bigger companies that had deeper pockets got into the business, the whole industry turned. Our ad rates went up dramatically to where we could no longer afford to advertise monthly like we were doing. And so we were faced with, well, what do we do? Do we just shut down or do we die a natural death? And my thought was, if I can't afford to advertise anymore, let's just shut down and move on to other things.
So it sounds like it...
So
Sorry, go ahead.
So I moved on to being a computer teacher because computer programming was just starting in high schools.
Nice. Very cool. So it sounds like it just the big fish were moving into the industry and it was hard to compete at that level.
It was.
Yeah.
Most of the software companies that were what I call our mom and pop software companies did go out of existence at that time.
So when you were teaching computers, were you teaching programming or more of a basic how to use them sort of thing?
I was teaching programming. Mm-hmm. In a local high school, they had all apples, and they were looking for another computer teacher, and so they saw what I had done up until this time and hired me. And so that was kind of fun to share now with the kids what's going to be their future.
Yeah. What do you do today?
Today, I say I'm semi-retired. I moved from teaching computer programming into doing instructional design. So for about 20 years, I did computer-based training, developed programs for corporations for computer-based training, and then as the internet came out, I started doing online training, writing programs for the companies so they can access them online. And then about a year and a half ago or so, I decided that I would still do this, but not full-time anymore. And so I call myself semi-retired. And I live on a farm with horses and cows and chickens.
That sounds pleasant.
It's very pleasant.
Good.
It's a whole change of lifestyle, but I will tell you, technology is here even in the farming industry.
Yeah, I bet. All right. So if you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, if you have an Atari right now, just love it, because that was all of the years that I've been doing computer programming, which now is, over 30. That system was the epitome of systems. I could do things on the Atari that I cannot do today on my system.
So, can I have an example?
The animation. The ability to, like for the Big Math Attack, it would read the keyboard as the program was going.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to do that today.
Cool.
So those are two things that I've been challenging myself to figure out a way to rewrite some of the programs that I wrote, and I've hit a couple of walls. Unless I want to do assembly language.
Right. Well, great. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any? You don't have any of the software anymore, do you? In the basement somewhere?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay.
When I moved, I didn't take a lot of my software.
Sure. Just thought I'd ask because, like I said, some of it hasn't been properly digitized yet. So might as well check.
Right.
Have you heard from other people? Has anyone ever seen your name and go, "Oh, did you write those Atari books or anything?" Is anything like that ever happened to you?
No. No, I have not. But see, my name changed rather, I don't want to say quickly, about 8 years after we closed the doors on Thesis. But I did not run into anybody who had the books or had the Atari enough to recognize either the company name or my name, which I found disappointing.
I'm sorry. Well, I have the book. My dad bought the book when I was in 6th or 7th grade. He bought the advanced, the Atari program with 55 programs. I still have my copy of it, and it's a treasure.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But that's one of the things. And actually, most people don't even know, because of the name change and my career change, that I did this stuff. It didn't seem relevant when I was working for corporate America to say, hey, I did all of this years ago,
right,
when we were first coming out. So it never came up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I have what I need.
Thank you for finding me.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.